And gentlemen, just a quick review of what we did in class today. This was your bell work problem. Remember, we were talking about probability and the likelihood of events occurring. When you're looking at a problem like this, remember you need to be identifying key phrases, key words. Once you get to the very end, it said which best represents the probability that at least two toothpicks will be touching when they land. So this question tells me where I need to go back and look in the problem to find out the information I need. And since it says at least two toothpicks will be touching, I need to go back up here where it mentioned two toothpicks again. So Nathan concluded that it was more likely than not that at least two toothpicks would be touching when they landed. Now, most of my classes I sat there and I told you that the answer was B, it's 1/2. But it came to my attention later on during the day after discussing with some math teachers that there seems to be a little bit of a disagreement in what more likely than not can actually mean. So, for the time being, what I will have done is accept answers B and C. Because, like I said, there's been some discussion, and I don't want to jeopardize anybody's grade based on the fact of just my personal opinion of what I think the answer is. So, if you chose B or C, you're going to get credit today. Remember, you do have a problem tomorrow to expect it. It's going to be over the same kind of stuff, probability and things of that nature. So be ready. Now, today we actually had a lesson. Our lesson was over population. Now, as you can see, we have all the answers already put in place. The reason for this is I want you to be able to see the answers, and I'm going to be able to explain to you why those answers are that way. Okay? Now, what we're looking at is the differences between a population and a sample. Now, a population is a very much larger size grouping of people or grouping of objects, whereas a sample is when you take a subset of that group. One class I explained, if you think about New York City. New York City is a huge city, okay? But when you get to New York City, you can't say, yeah, I need to go to New York City. They're going to sit there and say, all right, which part of New York City? Do you want to go to the Upper East Side? Do you want to go to the Upper West Side? Do you want to go to Manhattan? Do you want to go to Brooklyn? Do you want to go to Staten Island? Do you want to go to Harlem? Okay, all these areas are subsets. These subsets are a sample of the whole population of New York City. So remember, samples are smaller groups, population are larger ones. So now it says, describe what you would do if you had to collect data to investigate the following statistical questions using either a sample statistic or a population characteristic. We'll get to those two in just a minute, so don't worry about the definition between the two, okay? So explain your reasoning in each case. Part A said, how might you collect data to answer the question, does the soup taste good? If you notice, I wrote down taste a teaspoon of the soup, okay? We only need to taste a small sample of the soup in order to know whether or not the soup tastes good. We don't have to eat the whole soup to know whether or not the soup is good. So that's how we're going to collect our data, is just by tasting the soup, all right? Part B says, how might you collect data to answer the question, how many movies do students in your class see in a month? If I want to know how many movies you all watch in class, I would ask you, okay, each of you take out a piece of paper and write down the number of movies you watched last month. Okay, that would tell me, that would give me enough data there to determine what the average amount of movies that the class watches each and every month. All right. So, part C, how might you collect data to answer the question, what is the median price of a home in our town? Now, I want to know the median price. The median price is the middle price, okay? So that means I would have had to collect a lot of prices, a lot of cost of homes, and had to have put them in order from least to greatest. So that's what I have to do. I have to collect a lot of data. I could do that from websites like Zillow. I can go to Cry Likes page. I can go to God, that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. You can go to Realtor.com and find places like that. But when you find what you have to do is when you get to those websites, you have to go to your neighborhood, okay? Or you want to select prices from everywhere in town to figure out what the average for what the middle price is. What is it going to most likely cost for that person to come in from another city and buy a new house? Okay? So part D, how might you collect data to answer the question, how many pets do people own in your neighborhood? Well, this is a pretty easy question. In order to find out how many pets somebody owns, you got to go up, you got to knock on the door, and you got to ask them, how many pets do you own? And you only want to do this for a neighborhood. You know, a neighborhood. Like, Binghamton, Midtown, Fraser, Raleigh, Bartlett, Germantown, Cordova, Collierville, South Haven, Olive Branch. These are neighborhoods. These are communities. Now, when you get into a community, you can go smaller. Like my neighborhood only has 80-something houses. That's all I'd want to go knock on. How many pets are living in my neighborhood? So then I can sit there and say, oh, okay, so Mr. James up at 3197 Smith Street, he owns a black dog that answers to Jamie. So let's see if this dog's name is Jamie, and then I will know who to take the dog back to. So you have to ask your neighbor how many pets they own. All right, part E. What is the typical number of absences in math classes at your school in a given day? Well, in order to find that out, you have to ask each math teacher. Okay? And you're going to ask each math teacher how many absences you have in the course of a day amongst all 4 of your classes. See, we got 4 homerooms, so 4 classes of math. So if a math teacher sees 4 classes, should they not see every student in that grade? They should. So remember that when we get to another part of the question. All right, F. What is the typical lifespan of a particular brand of flashlight battery? How do I collect that data? Well, your best way of doing it is to stick those batteries in the flashlight, turn the flashlight on, and time how long it takes for the flashlight to finally die. That'll tell you how long those batteries will last on average. Okay? Now you'd want to do that with like Duracell or Energizer or Rayovac or some of those off-brand ones just to see whether or not the off-brand batteries are just as good as an Energizer battery. Okay? Part G. What percentage of boys and girls in your school have a curfew? Okay? All you got to do is walk into a classroom, ask the students if you have a curfew, raise your hand. If you're a boy, raise your hand. If you're a girl, raise your hand, and you're done. All you got to do is just count then, and you'll know how many students. All right? And then the last one, what is the common blood type of students in my class? Again, all you got to do is ask the students about their blood type. If they know it, they're going to give you the answer. If they don't know it, then they obviously can't give you an answer. All right? So let's move on to the next slide. All right, so remember what I told you. We're going to sit there and describe what a population is versus what a sample is. We'll see right here. A population is the entire set of objects, e.g. people, animals, plants, from which data might be collected. A sample is a subset of the population, just like I explained to you with New York City. New York City encompasses everything in New York City, but then you have suburbs. You have smaller subsets, Manhattan, Upper West Side, Harlem, Dosa Tripla, all that kind of stuff. These are all just small little sections of the bigger town. Now, numerical summary values calculated using data from an entire population are called population characteristics. So if we pull the data from a population, then we got a population characteristic. If we pull the data from a sample, then we have statistics, a sample statistic. All right, so look at number 2. For which of the scenarios in exercise 1 did you describe collecting data from a population and which from a sample? Now remember, a population is a representation of the whole. Okay, so the ones that I thought about when I was looking through was simple. A population, let's see, the average number of movies the class watches. I'm only asking about the class. So since I'm talking about the class, and I'm asking everybody in the class, I'm asking for a population sample. All right, let's see, the math class is one where the students are absent. The number of absent from math class, that's a population, because that's what exactly I'm looking for. I'm asking every math teacher, that's 12 separate classes that represents everybody in the school, how many kids are absent. And then last, the most common blood type. All right, that's a population question. All right, you're going to ask that question to find out what the most common blood type is. You may be pulling a sample, but that's still a population-based question. Now, sample questions are more precise, like how's the soup taste? Okay, that's a precise question. We're only taking a small sample of the whole pot of soup. We're not eating the whole soup. All right, the median home price. We're looking at one price to represent every price of houses in the town. That's a sample. Okay, when you're using only a small set to represent a larger population. And then the number of pets in a neighborhood. The number of pets in the neighborhood may not be the same for every neighborhood in Memphis. So we're talking about a sample of our neighborhood to use as a representation for the whole city of Memphis. Okay, so you got to understand that. When you're looking at the data, you need to determine, is this going to be just a representation of the whole city, or is this the whole city? All right, is this everything, or is this just a subset of everything? All right, question 3. Think about collecting the data in the scenarios above. Give at least 2 reasons you might want to collect data from a sample rather than the entire population. All right, well, I wrote down cost and time. That's the most simple answers you can make. But think about it. All right, let's say how the soup tastes. Let's use the soup example, okay? If you make a big pot of soup, okay, are you going to eat the whole soup to know whether or not the soup's good or not? No, we're going to take a sample. So to make us just to get a teaspoon is cheaper than having to make a whole pot of soup. And it also takes less time to sample a small teaspoon of soup versus eating the whole pot of soup. So if you can sit there and go with a sample size, it's going to save you time and it's going to save you money, because you're going to be able to get so many more answers from a smaller group than having to sit there and do a larger group. All right. Last slide. Make up a result you might get in response to the situations in exercise 1 and identify whether or not the result would be based on a population characteristic or a sample statistic. Well, remember what I told you. Does the soup taste good? Well, an example response is yes, but it needs more salt. Okay? Now remember what I said. We're only tasting a sample of this soup, so that means it's a sample statistic. Okay? How many movies do students in your class see in a month? Now, we're talking about just my class. Okay. Now, if we were asking what's the average number of movies that boys watch in my class, that would become a sample. But since we're just talking about my kids in my class, then that becomes a population characteristic. Okay. What's the median price of a home in our town? You could say $150,000. And remember, I already told you this. Since we're only looking at one price to represent the whole city, that's a sample statistic. Okay. How many pets do people own in my neighborhood? All right, an example answer is 1 pet. You could write down 2. You could write down 5. You could write down 10. It's your choice. This is just one possible answer. Now, if you notice, I said it depends on the method of collection. Okay? Depending on how you're collecting the data, it could be both a sample statistic and it could be a population characteristic. Okay? What if your neighborhood is being used as a representation of just your home? What if your home was the sample, but then you went out and did everybody in your neighborhood? That becomes a population. But what if your neighborhood is being being used as a representation? I'm sorry. What if your neighborhood is being used as a representation for the whole city? Then it becomes a sample. All right. The typical number of absences in math classes at your school on a given day. Well, we can say 4 absences. That's still a population characteristic. Now, I know you're sitting there, but you say, Mr. Hale, I'm talking about just the math classes. Yes, true. That's just the math classes. But think about it. A math teacher will see every student in that grade. So if you go to both 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math teachers and ask them how many students were absent on average in the classes, you're getting an answer that encompasses the entire student body of Georgian Hills Middle School. So that becomes a population characteristic. What is the typical lifespan of a particular brand of flashlight battery? Now, here's the question. Is there only one brand of flashlight batteries out there? No. There's 10, 20, 30, 40 brands. Okay? So, if we're only looking at one particular brand, is that going to be a sample or population? It's going to be a sample size. So that means it's going to be a sample statistic. And you could have told me the battery only lasts 28 hours, 38 hours, 42 hours, 68, 67 hours, 99 hours, 82 hours. I said 54. That was my answer. Okay? These are my answers on the left, but the right, that's the answer that's the set one. Okay, whether or not it's a sample statistic or if it's a population change, population. All right. What percentage of girls and boys in our school have a curfew? Well, 65% of the girls have a curfew, 58% of the boys have a curfew. Now, this can be also the same way. It could be a sample statistic or a population characteristic. It all depends on how it is collected. If the data is collected in one particular way, you get a sample statistic. If it's collected another way, it's a population characteristic. Okay? So you just got to ask yourself some key questions, all right? Am I using this to represent the whole school? If it is, then it's a sample. Am I asking the whole school to give me an answer? If you are, then it's a population. All right? Ask yourself who exactly you're asking and how would the results be used. That should help you determine whether or not it's a sample statistic or if it's a population characteristic. All right? 7.2, 7.3, and 7.4, your homework is going to be problem set questions 1 and 2. 7.1, your homework is going to be exercises 6 through 8 in problem set 1 and 2. I wish you guys the best of luck on the homework tonight. If you have any questions, make sure you come into class ready to ask them. I will give you all about 5 minutes to ask any questions over your homework tomorrow. All right, y'all have a good night, and I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning.